So in sports, your data sets are extremely tiny and it's almost impossible. You cannot use a neural net to efficiently determine like some complex function. You're learning some function that infers what the price should be in the future. It's pretty hard to do that on 8,000 points of data, which is probably what you mostly get in sports. And in politics, the data is very disparate and spread around. You have to go into many silos. You have to pull out polling data. You have to pull out Democratic, Republican, for US markets, Democratic, Republican. So everything in sports betting is attached to a fee where, you have to charge, 7%. So the fee is this. If you bet 100 on the Spurs today to win, let's say at even odds or something like that, you will get $91 back if you win. There's a 9% fee there. That's the fee you have to pay, or the vigorish, the classical vigorish is what it's called. So Polymarket doesn't charge a fee. There's a 0% fee. If you have an exchange and you have no liquidity, you're not going to fill the bettors. They're not going to be able to eat. And so they're not happy with you, right? So you can imagine that they've raised, $3 or $4 billion. They're probably going to feed liquidity into their markets. And they don't want to feed liquidity into a market where a person like me will just take it all from them. And then they have to go and raise another $3 billion.
Welcome to the Ventura Labs podcast. Today, we're joined by Stephen Rothwell, head of AI at Sportstensor Subnet 41. With expertise in AI, sports betting, and incentive mechanism design, he shares insights into the hostile state of traditional betting markets for signal providers and how Sportstensor creates a friendly meta market on-chain. Stephen discusses the no-fee betting model, efficient market hypothesis, tracking signals over time for store value tokenomics, data challenges in sports and politics, proprietary eSports data, convex versus non-convex optimizations, and advice for principled subnet incentive designs. Now, back to Stephen with the 69th Ventura Labs podcast.
Okay, Stephen, head of AI at Sportstensor Subnet 41. It's your second appearance on the podcast. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing good. Feeling great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get right into it. You guys have made, I say, groundbreaking partnership with Polymarket. So, what would you say is the current state of the betting market as a whole?
Oh boy, yeah. I'll try to be succinct as I can about that, but that's a very big question. But I think probably what's useful is to narrow that down to what's the state of the betting market for originators or signal providers. Those people who use statistics or artificial intelligence to provide the inference that powers betting markets or prediction markets. So the general state is it's entirely hostile to these people. So what happens in traditional operators or exchanges, less so in exchanges, but more so for kind of like the bookmaker, your local bookmaker or DraftKings, is if you have any signal, that is, you have a machine learning system, you have an edge, you think you can beat the market, you bet and you win money. The instant you win money, if you win too much, you're instantly banned or canceled or limited. That is, your ability to bet too much money is dropped because these bookmakers aren't in the business of paying out to smart bettors who can beat them. If these bookmakers are kind of open to the smart money, they then allow you to bet either just a little bit, like I said, or in general, they will take your signal and push it back into the market and bet the opposite side on exchange by profiling you. So you have to KYC into these things and all that stuff. So I would say in general, Grad, it's pretty hostile to those people who generate signal because we can't get filled, we can't get down. I guess that's the terminology. We can't get down, right? We can't get $100,000 bet down or anything like that. So you can imagine when you have a large operation that is betting a lot of money and then trying to deploy these these inferences into the market to shape the line. It's very, very hard for them to get past these guardrails because what these bookmakers want is just the dumb money, the losing money, because that's helps their bottom line. And paying out winners and arbitrageurs doesn't help your bottom line. So on-chain's trying to change that a little bit, but it's a slow go. It's a slow going. Yeah, so very hostile, I would say.
And then you guys are trying to be this friendly place to the signal providers. How do you do this?
Yeah, so generally we're friendly because, in terms of Sportstensor, we're friendly because we work with Polymarket. And so I can explain a little bit about why Polymarket is friendly to bettors, because they don't have a fee attached to it. So everything in sports betting is attached to a fee where, you have to charge, 7%. So the fee is this: if you bet 100 on the Spurs today to win, let's say at even odds or something like that, you will get $91 back if you win. There's a 9% fee there. That's the fee you have to pay, or the vigorish, the classical vigorish is what it's called. So Polymarket doesn't charge a fee. There's a 0% fee. And so their mandate is like really, really different. And this is a huge innovation and why Polymarket has been growing so crazily lately, right? In the media and Twitter, all that. It's because when you don't charge that fee, your mandate is now to search for the ground truth in events like politics, economic systems, economic data like jobs and stuff like that. And then sports as well. So there's all these markets that they serve and they're trying to get to the ground truth, and they monetize by selling that data back to Elon Musk and like the US government. I think like Donald Trump Jr. is on their board and stuff like that. So like, they have a very unique monetization system where they can raise a lot of money. They can make money off of their partnerships. And then now this fee no longer exists in Polymarket. And so when a bettor comes to provide information to shape a market or a predictor or whatever you want to call it, there's no friction now for that information to flow when they're betting their money down. And so this is now very, very friendly to the bettors because there's no incentive for the bookmaker to charge the fee, because the fee is how they make money traditionally. Therefore, you would ban the winning bettor because they don't pay they pay the fee, but they keep soaking you, so you ban them. And then you just take the dumb bettors. That's all gone now. Now you can take money from dumb and smart bettors. And forgive me for the phrase dumb, or we just call it dumb money, right? But you're taking that money, and now that there's no friction, there's no incentive to treat different styles of bettors differently. Now it's just friendly to anybody who wants to try to shape the truth by providing inference and backing it with skin in the game. So I would say that's why things are different. And another note too, Polymarket is fully on-chain, so you can track everything. And where, these betting shops, they're centralized silos, you can't see what's going in and out, but you can see all the volume coming in and out of Polymarket. And so with kind of companies like Polymarket and less so Kalshi, although, Kalshi is pretty successful too, but they charge a fee. So they're kind of incentivized to sort of soak bettors a little bit, unfortunately. But Polymarket is very unique. And it's why Sportstensor partnered with them, because they have an ethos of searching for high signal data. And that's a very friendly attitude toward bettors because, again, no incentivization because there's no fee. And so anybody can basically put skin in the game.
Does the removal of that fee on Polymarket mean that the strong form efficient market hypothesis is realized?
Interesting question. Oh boy, let me think about that. No, I don't think markets are efficient, because even though at the point of when a market is about to go off, when it's about to be realized, so say politics, right? Everyone's factoring in information, right, over time. Say, let's take a politics market like Kamala Trump or something like that. And so everyone's kind of betting in, and you get to that point just when the election's about to happen, you would figure that all possible information is factored in to that line. You would think so, right? Like, does that make sense to you? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the point of information entropy, where things are the most efficient. However, it's a mistake to say that price is efficient in signal. It's efficient for, that's the price, the consensus of the market that it wants to converge to. But it doesn't mean that it's as close to the truth as it possibly can, because there might be a lot of weight on Kamala. So you remember when Kamala, everyone said Kamala had a 54% chance to win. Well, I thought that was like 0.2% personally. That's what I thought. And that turned out to be right. That Trump, she had no chance against Trump if you really looked at the data. But why was the market pricing her at 40, 45 to even 60% at sometimes? Why did the market do that? It's because the motivations of the money that weight basically that price and then anchor it in at a certain convergence or point of convergence, say, 50% Trump, 50% Kamala. That's not efficient. It's because the money that they're backing may not be correlated very well with the best signal that you could possibly produce with data. So there were guys who are looking at Kamala Trump, and they were looking at the data because they were looking at like Scott Pressler in I forget the state's name. What's Pennsylvania? Yeah, in Pennsylvania. You know who Scott Pressler is?
No
You ever
clue.
hear that? Yeah, he's crazy, man. He went knocking on all the doors in Pennsylvania, and then you saw the Pennsylvania data was going to flip Trump, but then the market didn't respond to it. They kept thinking Kamala was going to win. So the Democratic money came in. He kept pumping Kamala to keep and so you can see that the markets aren't totally efficient because they're optimized to make the price efficient, but not the signal that actually would make it efficient, if that makes any sense.
When you say make price efficient versus the signal, what is the distinction you make between those two?
Yeah, good question. Good question. So when you have a spot market, so say again, let's take our example of Trump Kamala. Sorry if it's to say so sorry. I find it a fascinating market, but that market is price efficient. That is, it's priced exactly where the participants and the market want it to go as information comes in over time. So as you're converging to the point of when the election happens and then everyone gets paid out, that price is floating to where exactly those market participants want it to go. But it does not mean that those market participants are in fact efficient at predicting the outcome. Hence Kamala getting 46% chance. I think she had no chance. And so you have to understand that price is created by a distribution of opinions, right? All markets are distributions of opinions. I think in our first podcast, we talked about that. So you have a distribution of opinions, and it's only in the tails and in the proper tail, the ones who were predicting Trump to win, those were the people that were right. And there are far and few between who are willing to put skin in the game that much on that bet. But that's who is right. So what we're trying to do at Sportstensor is make a meta market on top of Polymarket. So Polymarket makes the price efficient because they're dealing in individual markets. And they see the bets come in and they know where the price wants to converge to be. But signal markets are stretched through time and many, many, many wagers. This is a very important distinction. So the operator is efficient in price, but Sportstensor is efficient in signal because we're gathering people's signal over time and the volumes bet over time and creating a very principled way to measure that person's ability to consistently provide signal in many markets over time rather than a spot market right here, right now, just betting on Trump and Kamala. So I hope that makes sense that operators are convergent and efficient on price because they know where the market wants to bet. But it doesn't mean those individual participants are efficient at finding edge. Not at all. No. And that's why betting markets exist. That's why people could win at it. Because if it was a truly efficient marketplace, nobody would ever make money. That's more like FX markets, which are truly efficient. But sports markets and politics markets are wildly inefficient. And that's the difference, I think, in my mind. Does that make sense to you?
Is the efficiency due to the size of the market? Because FX markets are the largest markets in the world. And sports markets are significantly smaller.
Absolutely. And the size of the data sets really matter. So in sports, your data sets are extremely tiny and it's almost impossible. You cannot use a neural net to efficiently determine like some complex function. You're learning some function that infers what the price should be in the future. It's pretty hard to do that on 8,000 points of data, which is probably what you mostly get in sports. And in politics, the data is very disparate and spread around. You have to go into many silos. You have to pull out polling data. You have to pull out Democratic, Republican, for U.S. markets, Democratic, Republican, I guess, what's the word for it when you are registered as a voter? You gotta have accurate data. You gotta know how many illegals are voting because that happens. I'm not trying to, stoke a fire or anything, but I'm saying that's what actually happens in like California. And so you have to like kind of factor in all these things that are very hard. So data is different in different markets. And that's like a really important thing to understand. And in FX markets, highly, highly efficient, but still beatable by smart people like maybe Taoishi, Subnet 8 could beat them. I think they like beat them 1.5%, which I think a lot of people like were kind of like only making 1.5%, but 1.5% in an FX market is a stupendous return because they're so big and there's so many data points and bets and the time. So FX is like every minute you get a new update, where in sports you don't get anything like that. You just get every day you get new data, but every minute you get new data in FX. So think of the efficiency as related to the size of the data sets. The more and more data you have, the more and more consistent your inference output is. And so in sports and politics markets and in a lot of economic markets that Polymarket serves, in eSports markets, the data is incredibly fragmented, and it's easy for somebody who has special access to adversely select and make a lot of money really quickly. If you got an edge, you can really exploit it. So I hope that makes sense. So I might say that a lot of times in this interview, but I hope that makes sense. It's just related to the size of the data set and the amount of data that gets pushed in. So yeah, that would be my
You
answer.
you described what Sportstensor is doing as essentially a meta market on top of Polymarket.
Yeah.
And that's because you track this signal over time. How do you relate tracking that signal over time to Subnet 41 being a store of value token?
Right. Yeah. So what we do is, we're essentially in our incentive mechanism, we're creating exchange rate for signal. We're saying we're willing to pay. So we get a Bittensor budget. That's the emission. And, why use emissions for this? Emissions fund the commons. You can kind of think of it like this. Emissions train open AI models, and we use them to train open prediction systems. So emissions should build intelligence in some way. So trying to put that all together now. Okay. Sorry, I got a little lost there. So please ask the question again,
Okay.
Grant. Sorry. That's a tough one.
40, yeah. No, yeah.
Yeah.
Subnet 41, for it to be a store of value token, how does that relate to the signal over time?
Right. Sorry again. Yeah, sorry I got lost there. So so the store of value comes from the notion that you're providing signal over time, and then we're rewarding you over time. You get that token, and it's over time that you're developing your reputation with that signal. Right. And now I got it in my head. Sorry about that. So, you're betting volume, you're putting skin in the game, and you're developing an ROI over time. Yes. And we develop an exchange rate for that information. So we're willing to pay you an amount of the Bittensor token to get a hold of your signal and to keep incentivizing you to provide that signal. And if you do that, you get emitted the token and you hold that token in your wallet and you stake that token for the APY in your wallet. That becomes a store of value. Why? Because we charge a fee for you to partake to get this token, but then we funnel 100% of that fee back into a TWAP, back into the token. Yeah, okay. And that's That's exactly what we're doing. And so by doing that, it's a closed loop where all the fees from the meta market are pushed back into the token. And if you hold that token, you're storing the value of the information that you provided to Polymarket to shape the truth. And say you lose your edge. It happens in sports betting. It happens to me. I've been doing this forever. You lose your edge and you have to recalibrate your model. You have to do some more work because things got a little more complex. If you hold that token in your wallet and you're staking it for APY, you're earning off of future people's plus EV information. So somebody else might develop the edge that you lost, but because you hold that token, this person is still providing information to the market. The token's still getting emitted. And because we're taking the fees and swapping the price, the value of the information that you previously provided goes up. So therefore, you're storing the value of your information in the token. That can only happen if 100% of the fees there's no leak, right? It has to be pushed back into the price. So you're siphoning off future value, the future value of those who will provide signal, assuming it gets harder and harder over time to produce signal because people get more and more sophisticated using machine learning.
And this only works because of your emissions being capped at the amount you actually make in fees?
That's right. So the way the incentive mechanism that we design work is we create an exchange rate. So that's what I was doing on my first little diatribe there. We create an exchange rate because we look at your past data, the amount of volume that you bet and the ROI that you make off of it. And then we do a little calculation. And then we say, this is how much we're willing to pay for your signal. We can only go up that much because we only have so much budget that Bittensor allots to us, right? So it's a budget allocation problem, classic knapsack problem, which is jargon for basically just, allocating budget intelligently. And you do that by creating an exchange rate. So when you do that, you can say I expect the market based upon all the history that we're collecting through the Polymarket routing. We expect this much signal, this much ROI. So we can say, we're going to cap our expenditure here. That turns out to be a very powerful thing because when you're principled in that way and you put a constraint on your optimization in your incentive mechanism like that please don't let the fees go over, please don't let the budget go over the fees, and you mathematically cap it, you can start to allocate the budget to max out as much volume as you can get to punch the fees up, but then you just, never pay out more than you have to. You can only pay out so much, right? We only have so much emissions. And so that just is really principled. And it's kind of like an innovative thing, I think, in Bittensor to use these classic optimizations that we use here at Sportstensor to just be principled and don't dilute the towel holder. We don't want to do that. We just want to, grow a business that can sustain itself because there's a lot of unsustainability here. And we don't want to do that. We want to reward our holders by just being principled with the payout. And so that's kind of our approach is to hard embed that reality in the math itself and then just restrict the emissions from going to the miners. If the miners aren't betting and producing fees, why should we pay out? We're here to create a signal market, not to give away free tokens for no skin in the game.
So miners actually place the bets, or do you guys place the bets on their behalf?
No, miners place the bets on Polymarket. We just build a DApp which allows their accounts to be tracked through us, essentially. And Polymarket gives us the right to charge a fee. That's our relationship. So they charge a 0% fee. They give us the right as a partner to charge a small fee. And so what they're doing is they're saying, okay, instead of a 0% fee, I'll pay a 1% fee because if I'm very good at producing the signal, I can get this store of value token and then create effectively a rebate on my bet, which is a very powerful thing. This is how our industry works. It works off of, market makers will come in and say, oh, you're charging 7% fee. I want a 4% rebate on every dollar bet of volume. And so we're just saying, we're just kind of recreating that system on Polymarket by allowing people to get a hold of the store of value token, which in its sense, because we don't pay more than the fees we collect, in a sense, you're actually just making more than the 1% you would pay in the fee to us. So we're swapping it back in. And so you're just getting a little extra benefit out of your signal by betting through us. And we just keep it principled by just not paying more than we collect. So you can kind of sense that, only the signal providers will get the token and many people will try and probably not win. It's a contest, kind of like Numerai, if you heard of those guys. And so there's a lot of value in creating a consistent signal over time because you get a lot of the token. And so it's a contest to get that. And you pay a small 1% fee to enter that tournament. So you're just routing it through our app into Polymarket. You're still betting it like you would on Polymarket. It's just a little fee to go through us. And all these guys who, think that they have an edge, if you do get that edge, you really get a nice bonus that should surpass 1% by quite a lot if you have good signal. Yeah.
So essentially, this is these bettors just opt in by by giving you this 1% fee that they end up getting back anyway through admissions.
Exactly. Yeah, in a roundabout way. I mean, they don't get it exactly back. So there's going to be losing. Like, it's good to be honest. What's going on? There's going to be some people who lose, right? And there's going to be a few who win, and the people who get the most signal win the most. And so a lot of people are going to try to route through this and try to get a hold of that valuable token, right? That's the thing here. And so they're paying that fee to get that token that gives them the right to earn off future value. That's a powerful thing. It just allows people to amass a stake in training in AI. So essentially, kind of like what we do is we're trying to train the market to be smarter. That's what we do. That's why we get these tokens and we're giving it to the high signal providers. We're trying to train the Polymarket to be a better truth system, and that's the signal market. And they get a hold of that token, they're willing to pay that fee, and there's going to be some people who try, and it's going to be hard for them to get to the token if they don't have great inference. So there's sort of that feedback loop where, those people who can really perform are going to generate a very large outcome, which really surpasses that 1%. So I think we kind of bind it to maximum 10% of the token allocation, depending on your signals. So those funds, which are very, very sharp, can make a significant reward here. And that's the battle. That's the incentive. Kind of like maybe like Ridges, who gives winner take all, but we've kind of spread it out over more people, right? So there's a big incentive if you can win. Not so much if you can't.
So essentially, the subnet itself is like a net zero economy, and you extract that signal. And then that signal, what is the value in that signal? What can be done with that? Do you just go make bets with that signal? Do you resell that signal? What's done with that signal?
Oh yeah, you can do a lot of things with that signal. Like you said, you can trade that in a market, but it's more likely valuable to our patron Polymarket to get that signal, to know where the truth should be rather than where the price wants to go. Price is not efficient. So if you have a service which tracks the data over time, Polymarket can look at that and go, okay, I have a really good idea, I think, because we have that history. We have this signal market. We can really track where that price ought to be and ought to go. And so it allows them to manage risk. So it's a risk management service. And you're incentivizing the people who help train these markets. So we're training this network of markets by getting these signal providers out of their silos to provide that data. And by giving them an outsized reward, they'll keep doing it. It's about the outsized reward. Can I make more on Sportstensor than I would betting alone on Polymarket? Otherwise, I just bet on Polymarket, right? So it's about really rewarding those few who can do. And if you do that, you'll end up training the market to be even smarter.
And this reward is outsized because of the future value of the token, meaning that the bettors will get better over time.
It's outsized because of the way that the incentive mechanism is created. So we allow up to a point, maybe 10 or 15% of the total emission to go to a single bettor, kind of like Ridges, right? So Ridges gives it all to one guy, right? And for us, it can't be one. It has to be many. But you can get like 10 to 15% of the reward if you're really, really good at what you want to do. And that's who we want to attract, right? We want to get these funds, these desks, which bet into many, many markets, and they're providing tons of money to get off providing that data to DraftKings and get on to Polymarket and provide your data by betting there. We'll just track them up and we'll reward them in the meta market for providing that signal, and everyone wins. There, like I said, the price is efficient at Polymarket, but the signal that makes it efficient isn't free. That's the key to everything here. So you got to pay these guys to provide that wonderful signal, and that's kind of what this budget allocation does. We make sure that we give just enough to the best signal creators to maximally incentivize them to keep going. So we get that budget. We make sure that there is a nice spread of signal providers, and we're just really searching for those few special ones, and we give them a lot of the token. But we give enough to those who aren't doing it to keep going as well. And then you try to create a very nice distribution of signal providers to inform Polymarket, to train their markets to be smarter.
What value is this signal to Polymarket, though? Because they're indifferent to each betting market, since they're not the ones like making the line. It's just based off liquidity pools.
Sorry, say that again. Sorry, I need to.
What is the value of the signal for Polymarket if they're indifferent to the outcomes of the individual betting markets?
They're indifferent to the individual markets, but they're not indifferent to somebody who provides data over thousands of markets. That's quite different. So if you have an entity which constantly wins in many thousands of markets, they're not indifferent to that, because it gets them closer to the truth if they pay attention to those people. So in the traditional market, you track everyone. So like in a bookmaker, you KYC and track everyone, and then you find those people that win, and then you exploit them. You say, like, look, I'm just going to take their data and copy trade it. But for Polymarket, they're very incentivized. They're very focused on finding the ground truth in a market. They want, when you see them, Tom Brady say, I just checked the Polymarket, they're admitting that they're very sharp at what they do. And so you really want to have that data in your risk management team. And so, and that's why we work together, is because we create that signal market for them, and then they get that information, and then they see the agents and they can score them based on trust. I trust this person to provide me this data. They get that data, and then they know how to take risk in those markets, or how to take risk on. They probably have an internal trading team. But also just, getting closer to the truth is what they want to do. They want to know where that market is going to end up. I assume eventually they'll charge a fee in the future. And if they do that, they'll have a very good risk management engine here. And that's kind of what we're building. We're trying to treat these people who provide signal a lot better than they get treated in the traditional market. And by aggregating and pooling them together in this system, we can really kind of score and rank these guys and try to collect the best possible signal providers so that their risk engine can trust these agents. It's the relationship between the principal and the agent, and you can kind of think of Sportstensor as the contract between them, rather than trying to measure them in individual markets. You can measure them over time, and over many markets, which is much more powerful.
I think the point that I'm getting tripped up here is the risk management. The risk management of who is what I'm trying to ask. Is
Oh,
this
well,
signal going to?
these entities trade, and they probably have market makers, internal market makers, who are feeding liquidity so that people can get filled, right? If you have an exchange and you have no liquidity, you're not going to fill the bettors. They're not going to be able to eat, and so they're not happy with you, right? So you can imagine that they've raised $3 or $4 billion. They're probably going to feed liquidity into their markets. And
Okay.
they don't want to feed liquidity into a market where a person like me will just take it all from them. And then they have to go and raise another $3 billion. So having a risk management engine just allows them to make the market in a sophisticated way, much like Wintermeat might for crypto, where they have inside information from Binance. They got access to the order books, and we don't. We schlubs who trade crypto don't have anything like that. And so you can just imagine that their internal risk management team, and by that I mean trading team, they're pricing all the markets and providing liquidity so people can get filled. Or they have relationships with people who will do that filling for them. The big entities like a hedge fund. If the hedge fund has access to a very principled signal market, that's a very valuable thing. Now that's information that they can take and then start to provide liquidity for these people to take large bets and fill it up. It's much better to have a market where I can put $150,000 down on an NFL game, gets eaten up like that, rather than have to bet $500 in 50 different venues. That is horrible. You don't want to do that. Where each one of them can ban or limit you or say that take your account away. Managing all that is horrible. So you can imagine the value in that as they scale and grow their trading team.
Is this something that is on Sportstensor's roadmap? Do you envision that you guys ever become this market maker with the signals that you're collecting?
Could be. I think we're just more concerned with the aggregating and the pooling of the inference. So again, we train the truth. That's how I view us. We're like a training system using the Bittensor mission to train the truth. So we're aggregating and pooling that information, but then the deployment of billions of dollars of capital into a market like Polymarket is huge amounts of money in politics and sports betting. That's a little bit beyond our capability right now to provide that type of liquidity and fill up and match up. But interesting. It could be interesting in the future if we could raise, some money and build a hedge fund. We would probably pursue that, but it is a very expensive proposition to handle large scale NFL markets where $1 million bets can just get filled. Like Billy Walters will come in with $1 million and fill you up. Now you're on the line, right? So you had better be good at what you do and have good signal if you're going to attack that market.
So what is the total addressable market for you guys in your eyes? How much money can you actually make from this signal?
Huge market. So there's about $2.4 trillion in volume. That's a confirmed value. You can look it up. Bet through markets. About 1.6 trillion is through legal markets. That's in volume. So just that's not revenue, but that's volume. And about 0.8 trillion is bet through gray markets, which are like these kind of shady sports books that still exist in America because, PAPSA reduced America to, like this kind of casino gray market, and it still exists. It's called PPH books, and you have Costa Rican books and illegal sports books. So it's about 66% is legal, 33% is illegal. $2.4 trillion market. So even if we took $1 billion in volume in a year, we would make 10 million in fees to swap back into the token. And then we would pay out some amount of Bittensor budget. So the amount of money we would make for Bittensor would be the difference between the two. $1 billion in volume sounds like a lot, like it does, but it adds up really quickly because you're betting, $200,000 a day on average. So some desks are about $1 million a day. You're just betting, and some are a lot more. So you can just imagine every day as you're kind of accruing that value and you have many desks, that volume can get pretty substantial. So our job at Sportstensor is to convince these high-scale desks to bet through us because we're rewarding them properly for their signal. Their signal isn't free, so we're trying to reward them to stick with us and stick with Polymarket, and that's the premise here. And so, yeah, you can imagine $2.4 trillion in volume. I mean, can we get up to $1 billion? That's a pretty good company already. Doing 10 million in fees because we charge 1%. I think that's doable. That would take about, let's add it up. So an average desk will bet $1 million a day. $1 million a day. That's a really big desk. That's 365 million a year. If we can get
Get you a third
three
of the way
major
there.
desks, yeah, like 3 UIDs, 3 miners that are real entities in Las Vegas or Britain or in one of these betting hubs, that builds a business right there. And so I'm happy to tell you that we're in talks with at least 2 or 3 now. I can't say their names, of course, because there's no deal yet, but I'm already talking to people I've traded with in the past to get on it, and we're getting a good response from them. A little bit of hesitance about Bittensor. I don't know what it is. What's this detail? Takes some education, but a very good response so far. Nominally around the 41% APY. That's a real kicker. So hopefully we'll have our business covered just by 3 desks alone by the time we get going in December.
And the whole point of the subnet, would you say it is to make the perfect line?
Oh, the point of the subnet is to train the truth. So think of it, AI trains on data, right? So you have AI, you got data, you're training something, you're trying to get some output. We're trying to train the truth on prediction markets. So, like I said, the price is efficient on Polymarket, but it's not necessarily the ground truth. It's not where it should be because that's where the public thinks it should be. We're trying to train these markets with our data through Bittensor, through the emission to get closer to the truth. So the signal market, the meta market, is the point of Sportstensor to help Polymarket understand where that price should be, even if the price isn't gravitating toward that, because the consensus of the public is different, right? And so essentially you're trying to track those people who can adversely select. That is, they have information advantage. Informational efficiency is the point of why we exist. Yeah.
Could you then take this a step further and distill it into it's just a data problem? The more data you get for these models, the better data you get, the closer you are to the truth?
Yeah, the more data that you get, the better the model should be because you have more data points for statistics to operate on. But the problem is that you're limited to the amount of data that you can use in sports, particularly in eSports, because only so much data is created. So even if you want more data, you can't get it. So you're trying to train models on these small small data problems. They're very small data sets. So think of, let me give you an example, Grant. Templar. They train like a 70 billion data point model, right? I think they were talking about that for their LLM. 70 billion data points. In sports, you have 8,000. So that's a many, or how many orders of magnitude? Like 6 or 7 there? It's pretty crazy, like the difference. And so you're trying to compute statistics on the smallest data sets. And so you can imagine the error bars on your outcome are crazy, right? Like you're trying to statistically figure out something on almost no data. A good example, good metaphor for that would be like, um, when you get like a TV signal that's really bad, you can barely see the picture. And you're trying to figure out, what's going on there. In my day, in the '70s, you'd have rabbit ears, and you'd have to try to figure it out, and you get a better signal. But you get so little data that it's hard to eke that signal out. So those people who are very, very savvy at that, we're trying to find them and to incentivize them. So like what you're saying is that, like, yes, the more data you get, the more efficient your outcome, but the data is limited in sports, politics, esports, and many markets that Polymarket deals in. And that's why there's so much edge, and why people like go on X and say, I made $80,000 on Polymarket betting. I don't know what Jerome Powell will say on FOMOC day. So they'll have these crazy markets. And it's impossible because there's no data. So how do you train these markets up? How do you train them in this signal meta market? That's a very important question, because it's not so easy. You can't just be like a Templar and have 70 billion data points. And it's like automatic because you have so much data that you can apply statistics to it. It's a very different question when your data sets are extremely small and limited.
Do you guys rely on miners essentially to go out and find their own proprietary data, or do you help them source data? Is that an offering that you guys do?
Right. That's something, very astute question. That's something that we'll be offering with the new DApp that comes out. So in essence, we're attracting people who already have all the good data already. Okay, so the people we want to attract are already doing computer vision. They don't need computer vision, data sets. They already have all of the data sets from NBA, MLB, eSports data. Everything that they need is already there because they're an operating hedge fund already. They have 10, 12 quants getting all this stuff. And so those people are already taken care of. So that leaves the question, if you want to mine SN41, how do I generate an advantage? Because I don't have that data. And if you don't have that data, you're going to get adversely selected. So our job is to source data and give that data to our miners. We have to do that. And so my job as AI guy is to make sure that I get those data sets and provide them to our miners to create a fair playing field. It doesn't mean that you're going to win. You still have to be good at generating inference on small data sets, which is very, very, very difficult. But we're going to level the playing field by opening up our APIs. So I have built sports betting models already that we use behind the scenes for Sportstensor, the company. But I don't use them to mine. They're just sitting there, right? And so we have these AI models and the data that powers these things, and that data will be provided through API to our local miners who want to try to battle it out and compete with these big boys. So through a combination of data rights partnerships, which we can get into, or through a combination of our own internal APIs where we scrape and use computer vision to pull out important data points that you might not be able to get very easily if you don't have the skill. We're just going to give that all away. So to add it up, computer vision engine, robust APIs where we pull the data out from the various venues, and then proprietary data rights relationships where we will have permission to pass that to our miners to mine with. We're going to give that to the little guy because the little guy has signal too. It's just that they need the data to get there. And it doesn't mean, and we don't want it to be monopolized only by these large hedge fund structures, although they'll probably do the majority of the winning. So that's hopefully a very long-winded answer to that, is that yes, data will be made available to the miners.
And it's primarily to help the little guy, as you call it. How sophisticated are these data providers you're going to be working with?
Tremendously sophisticated. So I'll give you an idea. We're very excited about eSports. Very, very excited about eSports. It's a nascent market. There's a lot of betting. It's worldwide, and it's untouched territory for miners. And so we're going to be getting eSports data. Now, I can't talk too much about it because that's something that my boss Leo is going to talk about on our AMA soon. But I'll give you a little alpha. So we're in touch with um, the direct providers of eSports data, and we really want to provide that data to our miners to go after this nascent market, and then collectively market make that on Polymarket. So, there's a lot of volume there, but it's super inefficient. At least I found it to be inefficient because I've been smoking it, making money off of it. So what I want to do is I want to get our miners on that now. And so that data that comes in is directly live from the servers of the game providers themselves. Unfortunately, I cannot say their names for legal reasons, but I think you can understand who those brands would be if you do a little bit of digging. And so imagine now that you get live data directly in real time from the game servers itself, and you get historical data, which nobody has access to. No, nobody. People are building models off of linear and logistic regressions. Sorry, and I don't want to be jargony, but so basically just very simple statistical models looking at the win rate of the various players. So they'll scrape the data from these eSports websites like GG.com, goodgame.com. They'll go there, they'll get the data, they'll look at the win rates, and then they'll make a simple model, and that's what makes the market. But now imagine that you have like gold collection on every event. You have the gold. So I'm going to get a little dorky here. Okay. So in League of Legends, if you know League of Legends, there's people lane, they collect gold, they upgrade their items, they kill each other, destroy the towers, and then you destroy the base, you win the game. So this is this whole game of like fighting and video game battling. And so you're tracking like how much gold they make in real time, their experience, how many kills they got, the health of the towers that they're fighting over, how they combine the XY position of the characters in time. And as they go and they fight for their advantages over the battle map, you get all that if you work with us as a miner. You don't get that. And you can't get that. There's no advantage for you because you cannot get that data unless you work with us, because we have the data rights contract, or at least we're trying to figure that out for many things, not just esports, but we want to work with guys like Radar as well, which is a much longer deal, Sport Radar, which has this type of data for golf, for instance. So if you get that proprietary data that you can't get, that normal people can't get anywhere else, and you feed it to miners, that signal engine, that signal market that we're creating gets much more powerful, because now we're training Polymarket's markets on this data through our miners on data that is very special and unique. So we're adversely selecting the rest of the market because we have informational advantage. This is what we want to do. This is the essence of the Sportstensor Delaware company, is we're building that data substrate so our miners can get right in there and start feeding off of the best possible data they can get. So very concerned with that. And that's what we're doing behind the scenes, is trying to get access to the data rights. Kind of like Subnet 44 does with soccer.
And I want to zoom out a little bit here. In
Sure.
some of your videos that you've put out on X over the past few weeks, you've talked about convex versus non-convex optimization problems. And then just to broaden it to Bittensor in general here, how do subnets identify which problem they're trying to solve, which type of optimization?
Okay. Yeah. So it's good to just discuss the main point of what. So in optimization, there's two types of optimization. There's convex and non-convex. Okay. So neural nets are non-convex. So and convex optimizations are very special optimizations. It's things like linear regression, logistic regression. You might have heard these words before. These are convex optimizations. The principal value of posing an optimization as a convex optimization is that you are guaranteed one global solution. Okay, so if you can fit it to the math and you find an optimum way to reward your miners. You are guaranteed you cannot do any better than that. You absolutely cannot theoretically do better than that. If you have a non-convex optimization, like a log loss, so I'll give you an example. I very much like Templar's incentive mechanism, like a very, very principled, very, very good. They have a log loss function, which is non-convex, I believe, and it can get stuck in. So if you think of hills and valleys, it can get stuck in a local valley. It's not the best it could possibly do. So you have to work a little bit harder to find a very, very good solution if it's non-convex. So without getting too much into the math, a convex optimization guarantees once you've found an optimal solution to reward your miners, and you know that's true, you cannot do any better. And that's why for the last 100 years, people who have been inventing incentive mechanisms going as far back as 1895 have always posed their optimization problems between principals and agents. So principals are the people looking to hire the agents or to pay for their labor, kind of like you give tokens to the labor, the miners. If you pose it as a convex optimization, you get a very principled solution, which you don't have to worry about too much. You're not leaking out value and paying incorrectly to miners, which is a big problem in Bittensor, right? So if you're doing a non-convex problem, you got to be very careful about how you pose that. Otherwise, you can be spuriously paying miners too much of the emission, and then they're skating away with it. So they'll game your system, right? This is a huge thing in Bittensor, gaming the system. And so they'll find a way to game your system because you're not very, very principled and trying to find that one optimum solution. You have many, many solutions in a non-convex problem. And so you can leak a lot of tau to really clever miners who find out how to game your system. And, you don't want a very leaky game theory in your contract. You want a very principled one. So convex optimization just gives you that because it guarantees one global solution. Once you have it, you can't really do any better. I hope that it's a very difficult thing to explain if you're not a mathematician.
In these two different scenarios, how would you decide what type of admission distribution to do? Is one of them better for winner take all or a more linear distribution? How do you look at it in terms of admission distribution, that curve?
Right. So if you set up your problem like we did as a convex problem, you could look at our docs and just take a look at what we did. If you just set it up with proper constraints, it'll take care of itself. So sorry, my cat's meowing there, but it'll take care of itself really if you set it up in a principled way. So if you go and look at our docs, you can take a look at our constraints. So we're just trying to optimize something, but we're trying to constrain it in a way that distributes fairly amongst the miners. Where if you have a winner-take-all system, that is extremely inefficient. In fact, it's an NP hard problem to distribute to a winner-take-all system, which means you're probably overfitting to noise if you're just doing a winner-take-all system. It's very, very rigid to do that because how can I explain this simply? If you're doing a winner-take-all system, that person can overfit their solution, their inference, and when they overfit, you pay them a bunch of money. But then when that solution is put into production, into a product, it turns out to be slop and garbage and noisy. And you're like, oh shit, well, I just paid all of my budget to this one guy because it reduces the output to a singular point, right? and that's actually something called NP hard it's an NP hard problem to figure out if that's efficient or not, or when you're trying to optimize that. And so it's really, really noisy and brittle, where if you have a convex problem, which constrains the payout. So we have something called a diversity constraint, which basically says, I want at least N miners out of my 256 miners to receive a reward. It spreads the reward out. It forces the reward to spread out based upon the signal and the volume that they provide. That's our exchange rate that I was talking about. It forces that budget to spread out over the miners mathematically. It cannot be any other way. And then we find that globally optimal solution. There's only one solution. So we currently set it at the maximum amount of tokens in a Bittensor epoch that a miner can earn is 10%. So that at least rewards at least 10 miners. At least 10 miners have to make money every epoch. And we actually kind of spread it out over many more, depending on those who can produce ROI. We assume at least 20% of the miners will produce an ROI. So if they do that, you naturally spread out your budget over these guys through a constraint itself. And because there's only one solution in a convex optimization, you know it's optimal. You know it's the best you can possibly do given the constraint that you provided it. So in that way, the curve is very naturally distributed, where the best miners and the worst miners are in the tails, and the average is in the middle of the distribution. So that's how we approach it. We don't want to plug it up onto one guy. There's a natural way to think about that too. If you don't distribute your emissions to at least some amount of miners, then how do you know that your output generalizes properly, right? Because it's inference that, they're providing you some sort of inference. How do you know that your inference isn't rigid and brittle? Like, you know that when you have a spread of miners who get rewarded, and then you can compare all of their outputs, right, over time. So we're looking at their signals over time. And because we have at least 10 miners, in theory 10, but in practice more, we can look at all of their outputs and say, okay, the truth is probably an ensemble. We were talking about that before. It's much more robust to have 20 miners who are all winners. Some win more than others, but you can look at all of their outputs and then kind of figure out where the market should go. I don't think Polymarket is interested in just one guy. I think they're interested in a big spread of people with diverse and different opinions that win over time, but not necessarily in the same market. And they might even be juxtaposed against each other in a market. They might be trying to adversely select each other. And in that fight to be more right than the other guy, that's where the value is when you pool all of their output together. That's why our IM is cool, because it enforces a principled optimal distribution of that budget across the miners.
All right, Stephen, I got one last question for you here today. And I think it ties in nicely with this whole conversation. Okay. What advice do you have for incentive mechanism design for Bittensor subnets? What advice do you have for incentive mechanism design, since you've spent so much time on the Sportstensor design?
Well, that's a good question. I want to be careful here. I want to think about that. That's a very good question, Grant. I would say that being principled is probably the most important thing. What do I mean by principled? So whether you choose a very tight convex optimization type approach, or whether you use a heuristic, which is just a judgment of what you think the score should be, or you have something more robust like Templar, which uses log loss, it's important to be super, super principled about your contract that you're designing, to your contract with the miners that you're designing. You don't want to leak tau to people and get nothing for it. You don't get any good inference. You don't get any good market signal or whatever it is you're searching for. Maybe you're searching for a better translation than Google or something like that in a subnet. You don't want to leak your tau out to these people who are gaming your system. That's the worst thing that can possibly happen, because that's a raw dilution to the tau holder without any value created through the subnet for a business to generate income and then push it back into the token. So the worst thing you can possibly do is I don't want to say ignorant, but like you don't want to be dilutive in an ignorant way, and not in the sense that it's like you're being ignorant, but in the sense that you just don't know what you're doing because you made a poor incentive design. So you can look at how you're building a score, and you can say like, look, I only want to build this score if it's anti-dilutive. Like us, you can create a constraint which just hard says I'm not going to emit unless I'm making money for the Tau ecosystem. That's what we do. But in a research subnet, you might not have that ability to do that, because in the research subnet, they might have a longer time frame, like quantum, for instance. So quantum is pretty principled. 63, I think they're trying to fit Bittensor emissions to certain problems to make advancements in quantum mechanical research. Is something I spent a lot of time doing back in my younger days, and I see what they're doing, and they consistently work on taking a more principled approach and saying, look, I have to have some sort of value coming out from my system. And so just look very carefully at the way that you score things, and make sure that there are no leaks in it. And one of the ways you can enforce no leaks is by making very good constraints on your system. So if you look at our docs at Sportstensor, we have a whole section on constraints. So don't just build a score and say, the score is how much you're worth. Build constraints into your score. Say, yes, this is your score, but only if this constraint is satisfied. Hopefully that makes sense. It's the constraints which act as guardrails to your incentive mechanism that don't let miners go past those guardrails. So the last thing you want to do is build a bridge without handles, and then everyone falls off the bridge and then it all collapses, right? You don't want to do that. That's a good metaphor. Build constraints into your incentive mechanism. And if you do that, it will protect it from leakage and protect the Tau holder. That's the best thing you can do if you're a new subnet creating an IM, in my opinion. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, Stephen. It's always a pleasure having you on, man. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you very much for having me.